Most people over 50 don't panic about money. They don't make dramatic announcements. They don't suddenly change everything about their lives. They don't sit around talking about worst case scenarios. What they do instead is quietly adjust. They plan a little closer in. They hesitate longer before committing, and they become more selective about their energy and their spending. From the outside, it looks reasonable, responsible, and even. And in many ways, it is. Life still functions, bills get paid, days move along. But here's a subtle shift that happens beneath all of that. Not a crisis and not fear. Just a sense that the margin feels thinner than it used to. There isn't as much room for mistakes or detours or the things not going according to plan. And most people don't talk about that part. They tell themselves this is just what getting older feels like, that it's normal to tighten up a bit, that wanting less is part of maturity. But that explanation never quite settles because what you're adjusting isn't age, it's uncertainty. I didn't recognize it right away either. There wasn't a single moment where everything clicked. No wake-up calls, no dramatic realizations. Just a growing awareness that time felt different than it used to. Not worse, just heavier. When you're younger, time feels generous. You assume there's plenty ahead, plenty of room to fix things later. Later feels open-ended. But at some point, it's different for everyone. You start to feel that distance between now and later compress. Years stop stretching out in front of you and start stacking up behind you. And that changes how you think. Not in loud ways, in practical ones. You start asking quieter questions, questions you don't necessarily want answers to yet. How long do I want to keep working like this? What happens if something unexpected comes up? How much flexibility do I really have? Most people don't ask those questions directly. They sense them first. They show up as hesitation, as restraint, as a subtle pullback from things that used to feel easy. And that advice people are given at this stage doesn't really help. It's tidy advice, well-organized advice. Save more, spend less, be careful, stick to the plan. But none of that addresses the part that people are actually struggling with. Because that concern isn't about discipline, it's about control. It's about wanting to know that you still have options, even if life doesn't cooperate. And when that reassurance isn't there, people adapt instead. They lower expectations quietly. They make peace with less than they planned. They tell themselves they don't need much anyway. Not because they're giving up, because familiar feels safer than the unknown, even when that unknown might actually offer more room to breathe. What's interesting about how rare people talk about that moment? The moment where they realize they're stopped thinking about the future with curiosity and start thinking about it with caution. Not dread, just caution. That's a subtle shift, but it changes everything. Because once caution takes over, most people stop looking for possibility. They start managing risk instead. And risk management is exhausting. It requires constant calculation, constant restraint, constant vigilance. It keeps life narrow. I see this a lot. People who aren't unhappy, but aren't quite settled either. They're functional, responsible, and capable. But there's a quiet sense that they're carrying more weight than they expected to at this stage in life. And that weight doesn't come from money alone. It comes from responsibility, from knowing that fewer things feel reversible, that fewer choices feel easily undone. When you're younger, mistakes feel temporary. Later, they feel more permanent. So people hesitate longer. They wait more, and waiting feels safer than starting, even when starting is the only thing that would actually change everything. This is where a lot of people get stuck, not because they lack the ability, not because they lack motivation, because they don't see a clear path that doesn't feel risky. Most paths they're shown feel extreme, either working harder for longer than you want to, or gambling on something that doesn't feel grounded, or accept a future that feels smaller than you hoped for. None of those feel good. So people stay where they are. They tell themselves that they're lucky compared to others, that they should be grateful. Gratitude is important, but gratitude doesn't replace agency. You can be grateful for what you have, but still want more room to move. Those two things can coexist. What I've noticed is that a lot of people at this stage aren't chasing wealth, they're chasing steadiness. They want to know that if they need to adjust course, they can. That if something changes, they won't be trapped. That if they want to say yes to something meaningful, they won't have to calculate the coincidences for weeks afterwards. They want confidence, not excitement. And confidence doesn't come from pretending everything is fine. It comes from understanding where your leverage actually is. Most traditional advice assumes time is your biggest asset. But once time starts feeling heavier, that advice loses its power because you're no longer trying to maximize decades. You're trying to protect quality. You want solutions that respect the life you already have, not ones that demand you rebuild everything from scratch. That's why a lot of people feel disconnected from the conversations around money and opportunity. They don't see themselves in it. They feel either too aggressive or too passive, too much hustle or too much restraint. Very little in between. And that gap is where confusion grows, because when nothing feels quite right, people stop looking altogether. They assume there's nothing left for them to figure out, that this is just how things are now. But that assumption isn't actually true. What is true is that the way opportunity works has changed. And most people haven't been shown how. Not clearly, not calmly, and not in a way that feels grounded. Opportunity today isn't about effort alone. It's about positioning. It's about understanding how income is created now and where it can exist without consuming your entire life. A lot of people think earning differently means working more. But earning differently usually means working once in a way that continues to matter later on. And that's a very different idea than we were taught in our younger years. And it takes a while for us to really land that, especially if you've spent most of your life being paid for one time in, money out. That model trains you to believe that effort and exhaustion are the same thing. So when someone suggests that there might be another way, it sounds unrealistic or worse, irresponsible. But here's a quiet distinction most people haven't been shown yet. The difference between income that depends on your presence and income that depends on your understanding. Understanding compounds. Presence doesn't. That's not a pitch. That's an observation. And once you see that distinction, you can't unsee it. you start noticing how many people are still trading energy for outcomes that don't last. How many systems reward setup more than stamina? How many opportunities aren't visible unless someone slows down enough to explain them properly? This is where clarity starts to matter more than motivation, because motivation comes and it goes. Clarity lets you decide what's worth your attention and what isn't. It helps you stop chasing every idea and start understanding the mechanics underneath it. And for people over 50, that shift is everything, because you don't want 10 new things to manage. You want one or two things that make sense and don't require you to constantly start over again. This is where a lot of people misjudge themselves. They assume the discomfort they feel means they're behind, but more often it means that they're at a transition point, a point where old assumptions no longer fit, but new ones haven't fully formed yet. That in-between space is uncomfortable because it lacks language. People know something needs to change, but they can't quite articulate what that is. So they hesitate. They research quietly, they watch videos without commenting, they listen without engaging. Not because they're passive, but because they're careful. They're trying to discern what's real and what's just noise. That discernment is actually a strength. It just doesn't feel like one while you're in it. What often gets overlooked is that this stage will bring different kinds of leverage. You're less impulsive, more selective, better at seeing patterns. You're not trying to prove anything anymore. You're trying to protect your future self. And that changes what opportunity should look like. It shouldn't feel frantic or trendy or exhausting. It should feel grounded. It should respect your time, your intelligence, and the life that you've already built. When people finally encounter something, they don't feel excited first, they feel relief. Relief is a very different emotion. It doesn't rush, it settles. It creates space. That's usually the moment people stop saying, "Is this even possible?" and start asking, "How would this actually work?" That question is quieter, but much more powerful, because once someone asks how, they're no longer stuck in avoidance. They're engaged, they're thinking forward, they're opening to learning again, not because they're chasing something, but because they want to understand. Understanding restores agency, and agency is what most people are missing, not money. Money is a symptom. Agency is the root. When you have agency, you can adjust, you can respond, you can pivot without panic. That's what creates confidence later in life. Not certainty about outcomes, but confidence in your ability to navigate. This is why earning differently matters. Not for status, not for lifestyle, but for flexibility. Flexibility buys peace of mind. And peace of mind is what people are really after. At this stage, success doesn't mean accumulating more. It means feeling less trapped. It means knowing that if something shifts, your health, your priorities, your family, you won't be cornered. That knowledge changes how you breathe, how you sleep, how you think about the future. And the truth is, that kind of stability doesn't come from tightening your grip. It comes from expanding your base, from having something underneath you that isn't fragile, that doesn't disappear if you step back for a moment, that continues to exist when you're not actively pushing. That's the kind of income most people haven't been shown. Not because it's a secret, but because it doesn't fit into the old narrative. It doesn't sound exciting at first. It sounds sensible, and sensible rarely gets marketed well. But sensible is exactly what this stage of life is called for. Not safe in the sense of stagnant, but stable in the sense of supportive. Something that works with your life, not against it. This is usually where people expect instructions, a list, a method, some steps. But before any of that matters, there's something more important to acknowledge. You're not behind, you're not late, and you're not broken. You're discerning. And discernment is what allows you to choose better, not faster. If you felt like advice around money and opportunity hasn't quite landed for you, it's probably because it wasn't designed for this stage of life. It was designed for accumulation, not alignment. And alignment is what sustains effort long term. When something fits, you don't have to force it. You don't have to convince yourself. You don't have to hype yourself up every day. You simply continue. That's the kind of progress that lasts. That's the kind of momentum that doesn't burn you out. And that's what I want people to understand before they do anything else. Because once you understand that, earning differently is about structure, not hustle. Everything else becomes simpler. Not necessarily easy, but clearer. If you're curious about how this works in a grounded, realistic way, I've put a free blueprint in the description below called the Free Freedom Formula Blueprint. It's not a pitch, it's a map. It's something that explains how income is actually built today online without any noise or without any pressure. And if you want to be around people who are asking these same questions quietly, who are thoughtful, careful, and intentional, there's a community linked below as well called the Retirement Freedom Seekers. You don't have to rush. You don't have to decide anything today. Know this stage in life isn't about shrinking. It's about stabilizing so that you can move forward with confidence again. And that shift, that's where things really start to change.